This is part one of our 4-part caregiver series. You can find the links to all parts in the description below. This is Understanding Caregiver Grief.
Caregiving is essential to organ transplant. And kind of the way I like to frame it, what we worry about most is that people get some misinformation about organ transplant from TV, films, media, and some folks genuinely think that organ transplant's like changing a battery. You put in a couple of double A's and the remote works again. Transplant is a lot of work. Recipients need a lot of help. And because it's such a precious resource, limited resource, we have to ensure that they have all the help that they need to be successful. Kind of how I frame my job as a social worker is I'm not the hospital social worker and I'm not the patient social worker. I'm the social worker of that incoming organ. I have to make sure it goes to a forever home, and that forever home has plenty of people to help out. So caregiving is essential to success, and coming up with people, patients struggle coming up with people to be their caregivers for lots of reasons, but the most successful transplants usually have friends and family surrounding them to provide all kinds of different care. And so that's why it's essential to transplant, and I think that's uniform across all organs, and probably uniform across all major surgeries. That's the reason that we're here, to talk about why that's stressful, why that's important, but it is essential for the success of the graft or the transplant. Dr. Patel, I don't know if you want to add to that.
So sometimes I tell patients and their families when I meet with them, just like you have a medical team working for the patient also needs a team at home, right? So we can take care of all of the medical needs that the patient might need, but we still need that team at home. And a team is composed of different types of people who can do a lot of different types of things. And so that's how I kind of explain the importance of caregiving to patients as well, to kind of help them understand that when they leave the hospital, it's not that they don't have us, but just as important is what they do have at home.
Caregivers often worry about what they need to know about caregiving for someone who has liver disease or who is going to need a transplant. What would you tell them if you were to kind of start off with the basics of caregiving and what to look out for and what their role should be with working with the team?
Yeah, well, I can definitely start with that one. So I think what is really important, and of course, one of the topics that we'll touch on today is self-care. So I think one of the important things for our caregivers to make sure that they're doing is, of course, taking care of the needs of their loved one, the one that they signed up to be there for, but also making sure that they're taking care of their needs and doing kind of an internal reflection of themselves of what am I able to give, realistically, time, energy, financial resources, what do I have that would be helpful for this person, but also not a detriment to me. So I think a lot of our caregivers sign up, of course, not thinking about the me part, which I think makes a lot of sense. You want to do what you can to help your loved one. But I think that when we think about caregiving, it's a very daunting task, maybe breaking it down into smaller pieces of what can I do? What's in my control right now? That's what I would tell people, is if they're really looking over that hill and like, where do I start? Start with what you have control over and what you are able to provide, and work with your team, work with social work, work with your psychology team, your behavioral health team to, brainstorm different ways if you are having trouble coming up with those things.
Josh, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, just the acknowledgement that it's overwhelming. It seems to be an American culture, or maybe a hospital culture, or certainly a medical culture, that we want to pile up all this information quickly. And I work with families and explain that there's no expectation for you to memorize all this. You're not going to walk out of here being an expert in all this. The expectation is that when you need help, you ask for it. I think caregivers really worry about, we're pushing them out of the hospital and okay, great, now you have to do this on your own. And nothing could be farther from the truth. We follow these people as long as they're within our catchment area, and they always have 24-hour nursing service, meaning they can call a transplant nurse at any time and ask for help. When I work with patients and families, I sort of equate it to when I took my first child home from the hospital, and the nurse teaches you how to strap it into the car seat and how to feed him and care for him, and you drive home and you cross the threshold, and then you have that panic moment of, oh, now I have to do this on my own, and you sort of forget everything. We expect that to happen with caregivers, and that's okay. The expectation is call us and say, I know you told me this, but I forgot. And then over time, you get sort of the battle rhythm and the pace of how transplant works. But just want to acknowledge that, yes, this can be overwhelming and it can feel fast-paced, but you're part of the team, and caregivers have access to the team just as much as the patient does.
So with chronic illness, right, it changes the dynamics of the entire family, right? And as well as what the roles and responsibilities look like in a family, and how everyone gets their daily needs met. And there's, I think, loss associated with that, as well as subsequent grief that I think sometimes people struggle with how to express that or when to express it. Is it okay to express that? I mean, can you guys talk a little bit around loss and grief and how that can affect caregivers in particular?
I can jump in. So I usually talk to caregivers about different types of grief. There's what I call anticipatory grief. So the idea of, I had an idea of what my plan or my life plan would be like, or I thought, I had these visions of what me and my loved one are going to be doing. And now we're faced with this incredible challenge that we have to face head on. And that kind of dashes all of the plans or, visions that I had of us in the future. So you're mourning something that maybe you haven't really even experienced or had yet because of the situation that is occurring. Of course, there's survivor's guilt. Why did it happen to this loved one? Why didn't it happen to me or somebody else? And then, of course, there's also just the grief of this is a lot different than what I imagined for my life, our lives. I thought things were going to be different. What I tell people is that is absolutely normal and okay, because you're also human and this is also your life too. So I think it's also important to know that this doesn't just affect, the person receiving the transplant, but it, like you said, Aimee, it affects everybody that's involved. Chronic illness and grief, research shows, can actually alter neural pathways. So what that means is how we respond, how we react, how we might interpret situations that come up to us, because now we're looking at it through a lens of grief. Right. So if you can imagine you're looking through a pair of glasses that have a tint on them, everything you see has that tint now. So I think when you kind of talk a little bit about the changes that you see in the family structure, you might see those trickle down to your relationships with other family members or your own ability to engage in social activities or, things like that. So it definitely does change the way that even immediate family or your community might look at, that family unit, or even how you might go about planning for the future and things like that. So it is definitely something that we talk a lot about with our patients. Is it's hard to anticipate what the future is going to be like. So I try to have a lot of caregivers try to focus in on the present. What am I in control of? What is in front of me that I can attack And let me take stock of how I'm feeling about all of this and taking a step back and thinking about some of that as well.